I'm sure you've gotten one of those calls at least once in your life. You know, when some sales rep offers you a new phone plan. Let's be honest, we could all live without those calls. We've all had that moment, and I've been there myself before I switched to the other side, where you just want to tell the person on the other end, "Leave me alone already." Half the time, they don't even get to finish their pitch before we either hang up or blurt out, "Not interested, goodbye." I used to hate those calls too. Then, one day, I was offered a job, being the guy who makes those calls all day long. When I made my first few calls, I realized something. A lot of people act like they don't even think there's a real person on the other end of the line. Like we're just soulless, heartless robots who don't feel a thing. I was just doing what I was told, following the script to a T, with no say in who got called or not. And as a result, I got rejected a lot, and not always politely. That wasn't the only downside either. The job was mind-numbingly repetitive. Day in, day out, it was the same thing, and the shifts felt endless. Still, there were some perks. When I managed to sell a subscription to a complete stranger, I couldn't help but feel a little proud. It didn't make up for all the annoyances, but over time, I got used to it and developed my own little routines. But then, one call changed everything. It happened about a year ago. That call scared me. It left me unable to sleep properly for weeks. Up until then, in all my years of loyal service at the call center, I'd dealt with some weird stuff, but this time, I was genuinely terrified. So much so that I took sick leave for the first time in my career. I was in complete shock. It was a Friday, toward the end of my shift, around 6:30 in the evening. We were almost done with the call list, so most of the time, we were just hitting voicemails, and there were long gaps between calls. I'd been waiting for about 3 minutes when a new contact popped up on the screen. I started like I always did. "Hello, this is Jake from the sales department." The man on the other end cut me off, telling me to shut up immediately. Nothing unusual so far. That happened a lot. I paused to hear what he'd say next. Usually, when people say stop, they either complain about getting too many calls or say they're not interested. But this time, he didn't say anything. All I could hear was his heavy breathing. So I continued. "I'm calling to let you know about—" "Shut up, Jake." I started to feel annoyed. It had been a long day, and even though I was used to rude people, this got to me. Look, we operators have strict rules. We can't snap back at customers. No matter what they say, we have to stay polite. And even though I wanted to tell this jerk to get lost, I just said, "Sir, I apologize if—" He interrupted me again. "Don't you dare call me Jake again. I don't like it." "Sir, this is an automated system calling you. It's possible my colleagues have called you before." "No, I know it's you calling me all the time, Jake." While we were talking, I checked the call history, and a chill ran down my spine. He was right. My name was all over it. Turns out, I'd been sending him to voicemail every time, and he'd never picked up until now. Yeah, this was the first time he'd answered. Maybe it doesn't sound that weird from the outside, but trust me, it's not normal for the same operator to keep calling the same person over and over. There were almost 20 people in our department, and the system randomly assigned calls to whoever was free. But according to the log, it was always me. None of my colleagues had ever gotten through to him. I tried to calm myself down, thinking it was probably just a glitch in the system. That happened sometimes, and the name on the list could have been a mistake too. And honestly, this guy couldn't have known for sure who was calling him. He'd see the same number pop up, and it was pissing him off. He didn't know anything about me personally. If we're bothering you, then... He cut me off again. I told you to shut up, John. I was speechless. Jake was just a pseudonym, one of many we used at work. My real name is John. How did he know that? My name is Jake, sir. I tried to keep my voice steady, not letting on how much I was freaking out. No, you're John, and you keep calling me. I don't like it. I'm going to make sure it stops. I didn't get what he meant at first. Or maybe he was just threatening me. I stared blankly at his last name, trying to remember if it rang any bells. Maybe it was a prank by some friend who recognized my voice? But no matter how hard I tried, the name didn't mean anything to me. He went on. I know you're calling from a call center in northern England. That was true too, but I tried to reassure myself. Northern England is a pretty broad area, and there are plenty of telemarketing companies there. But then he named the exact city and the name of my company. Not only that, he listed my work schedule, knew I had a day off the following Thursday, and said he'd find me that day. All I wanted to do was hang up. But we weren't allowed to hang up until the customer ended the call. Looking back, I doubt anyone would have blamed me for hanging up in such an extreme situation. But at the time, I just sat there like a rabbit in headlights, listening. I'm going to make you stop bothering people, and that dark blue scarf of yours will come in handy to shut you up. Then he hung up. I was in complete shock. Would you believe it? I was actually wearing a dark blue scarf at that moment. For about 5 minutes, I just sat there, frozen, my hands shaking. My coworkers noticed something was wrong and started asking what had happened. The call was recorded, and my manager listened to it. I was still hoping it was just some stupid prank and my boss would say, "Don't worry, it's nothing." But I saw him go pale as he listened. The police were called. I was questioned to confirm that I had no idea who this guy was. Then came the investigation, and I refused to go back to work. My doctor signed me off sick. The police put me under protection, especially on that Thursday the guy had mentioned. In the end, nothing happened that day, or the days after. The investigation hit a dead end. They couldn't track this guy down. The number I'd called was no longer in service, and the name didn't match any current or former customers of the provider I worked for. Even now, I have no idea who this person was. I had to take sedatives. I was so on edge. I took sleeping pills just to get some rest. I kept having the same nightmare. This guy breaking into my house and killing me. After a few weeks, I pulled myself together and went back to work. I could have quit for good, and honestly, maybe I should have, but I don't have many skills, and I didn't know what else I could do. My first day back, and the whole first week, went more or less okay. I was nervous, of course, but not as bad as I'd been at home on sick leave. After about a month and a half, I'd mostly recovered from the horror. Then, a couple of months later, I was moved to a different shift and started working with a different provider. We did some training, and soon I was back on the phones. A couple of weeks after that, the nightmare returned. It was around 6 p.m., and a new contact popped up on the screen with a woman's name. I started my usual spiel, this time under the pseudonym Alex. There was a sigh on the other end. Nothing unusual. People do that all the time. I kept going, explaining that fiber optic had been installed in her area. "John, is that you again?" I recognized the voice immediately, and I froze. How could I have caught this psycho again? The customer's name was different. I'd checked and remembered the previous one because that incident had been too horrifying to forget. The man continued. "We didn't meet last time because you were under protection. I even thought about letting it go. But you've called me 6 times now, John. I'm not going to let this slide. I'll see you soon." He hung up. I immediately checked the call history, and once again, he was right. I'd called him 5 times before, sending him to voicemail, and this time he'd answered. It was just like the first time. I reported it to my manager right away, and another investigation started. But the result was the same as before. They couldn't find him. I quit that same day. I never went back to call centers. Weeks and months went by. I found a job as a store clerk. I thought, finally, all of this was behind me. Then one day, my cell phone rang from an unknown number. Out of habit, I answered. "Don't think I've forgotten about you, John. Nice leather jacket, by the way." It was him. I hung up immediately. He didn't call back. I almost passed out from fear. How did he get my cell number? And the creepiest part, I was actually wearing a leather jacket. That meant he was nearby, watching me. I started looking around. I was in a mall. Crowds of people, but no one seemed to be paying any attention to me. I tried to blend into the crowd, and when I left the mall, I ran to the nearest police station. I figured if I moved fast enough, he wouldn't be able to catch up wherever he was. But the police couldn't help. The call was untraceable again. After that, I changed my number and moved to a different state, hoping it would shake this lunatic off my trail. Now I have panic attacks every time my phone rings. I even thought about ditching my cell altogether. It's been 5 months and nothing's happened. I kept telling myself it was just some stupid prank. I mean, I changed my number and moved. How could he possibly find me now? But I'm writing this because I need help. For the past 2 hours, my phone has been ringing non-stop. The number's blocked, and I'm too scared to answer. It's the middle of the night, and I'm terrified to leave my house. I'm sure it's him, and he's somewhere nearby, watching me. This happened to me when I was working at a call center. Our office was small, and there were only 3 of us working there. Our schedule was 24 hours on, 72 hours off, so each of us spent almost the entire shift alone. During the day, everything was fine, but at night there were always strange noises. My colleagues often complained about it, but I, being new, didn't really believe them, thinking they were just messing with me. I usually worked with headphones on, and when there were no calls, I listened to music or watched movies. I arrived for my shift as usual, 15 minutes before the start of work at 7:45 a.m. There wasn't much work, so I sat quietly at my desk. Everything started around 10 p.m. when I received a call from a strange client. He was breathing heavily into the phone and trying to say something, but I could barely hear him. I repeated several times, "I can't hear you well. Please call back," and hung up. But instead of the usual beeps, I heard a loud scream, "Help us." After that, I started having internet issues. Then my headphones stopped working, and my laptop screen was filled with strange static, like on an old TV. I didn't think much of it and decided to deal with it in the morning, so I just lay down to sleep. By midnight, I started hearing a strange scraping sound throughout the office. It was so realistic, as if someone was dragging their nails across the wooden floor. As soon as I approached the source of the sound, it stopped. Then came the knocking on the radiators. Rhythmic, like someone was pounding their fist against the metal. I started feeling uneasy. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by my colleagues' stories. I turned on all the lights in the office and began searching for the source of the noise, but after checking the entire space, I found nothing. In the kitchen, the light bulb started flickering. I grabbed a chair, unscrewed it, and screwed it back in. It worked. But as soon as I returned to my desk, the lights started flickering again. By 2 a.m., the lights were flickering all over the office. The scraping sound returned, and I began to feel real fear. The air grew heavy, as if there was less oxygen in the room. I felt chills running down my spine. I decided the best thing to do was to lie down on the couch and try to sleep, convincing myself it was all just a dream. I was too scared to even turn around, listening intently to every sound. The noise grew louder. Every rustle, every knock on the radiator, and then footsteps. They were slow but distinct, as if someone was walking down the hallway. The minutes of waiting turned into torture. The footsteps seemed to be getting closer and closer, but when I felt a touch on my shoulder, my nerves snapped. I turned my head. I saw shadows. Something inside me screamed. My heart started racing and my legs turned to jelly. The shadows were everywhere, dark, long, and terrifying. They moved as if alive, surrounding me from all sides. I felt cold sweat running down my back. A scream escaped my lips, and, like a coward, I ran out of the office, constantly looking over my shoulder. Behind me, I heard the footsteps speeding up, as if someone was chasing me. I ran out into the street and didn't stop until I was far away from the building. The next day, I came back to quit and collect my paycheck, but when I entered the office, everything was quiet and calm. I asked my colleagues what was going on, but they just exchanged glances and said no one had worked in that building for a long time. When I tried to ask more questions, they just shrugged and said the place had been abandoned for years. I never understood what really happened that night, but I never went back there again. I'm a young guy who recently started working at a call center for a car dealership. The night shift seemed easy, quiet, few calls, and plenty of time to mind my own business. The first day went smoothly. I was getting used to the environment, learning the software, and chatting with coworkers. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But on the second day, everything changed. While digging through the work computer, I stumbled upon a strange file. It was named warning.txt. When I opened it, I found a note from a former employee. The text was written hastily, with typos, as if the person was in a rush. If you're reading this, you must be the new guy. Get out of here before it's too late. Something's not right here. The lights turn off by themselves, especially at 3:33 a.m. The calls, they're weird. The people on the other end say things they shouldn't know. Sometimes they just stay silent, but you can feel someone standing behind you. Don't stay here at night. They're watching. They're always watching. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a prank. But by the end of my shift, strange things started happening. The lights began flickering and then shut off completely at exactly 3:33 a.m. I was sitting in complete darkness, with only the faint glow of the computer monitor illuminating the room. Suddenly, the phone rang. The screen displayed the number 000-000-0000. I picked up, but there was only silence. Then a faint whisper, "You shouldn't have stayed." I slammed the phone down, but the calls kept coming. Every time, the same number. Every time, silence followed by a whisper. I started losing things. My pen, my notebook, even my coffee mug vanished without a trace. I searched for them, but they kept appearing in the strangest places. The pen on the floor in the corner, the notebook in the bathroom, and the mug. It was back on the desk, but it was full of cold coffee, even though I was sure I hadn't poured any. By the end of the shift, I was on the verge of panic. I decided to leave early, but the office door wouldn't open. I yanked the handle, pounded on the door, but it was no use. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw a shadow in the far corner of the room. It was slowly moving toward me. I screamed, but the shadow only sped up. At the last moment, the lights flickered back on, and the shadow vanished. The door clicked open by itself. I bolted out of the office without looking back. The next day, I called my boss to quit, but he told me there was no such file on the computer, and the last employee had left a month ago, after losing his mind and babbling about voices on the line. I thought it was over, but a few days later, a coworker who also worked the night shift called me. He said he found my jacket in the office. I was sure I had taken it with me, but I decided to check. When I went back to the office during the day, everything seemed normal. But as soon as I picked up the jacket, the lights started flickering again. I heard a voice from the corner of the room. "You came back. We've been waiting for you." I rushed to the exit, but the door wouldn't open. This time, I noticed strange symbols scratched into the walls, as if someone had carved them with a knife. They formed words. "Stay with us." I don't work the night shift anymore, but sometimes when I'm alone at home, my phone rings. The screen shows 000-000-0000. I never answer, but one night I couldn't resist. I picked up the phone, and on the other end I heard my own voice. "You can't escape. We'll always be with you." Now I hear footsteps behind me, even when I'm alone. And every time I look in the mirror, I see a shadow standing behind me. It's getting closer. Every day, a little closer.